Chapter 1 Academy City. Academy City loomed over Tokyo like a large, dark monolith, its skyscrapers and imposing buildings standing out from the rest of the city suburbs, a contrast between the normal world and the gateway to the land of science and technology. It was surrounded by walls, like a fortress, a bastion that guarded its secret fiercely, a microstate that resided in the heart of Japan. Shigeo couldn't help but feel intimidated by the imposing silhouette of the city of science, which was growing more and more as their bus took them closer and closer to their destination. Every second that passed, mechanically and coldly, like a machine that couldn't stop, took Shigeo away from his familiar world and drove him and his brother towards their new life among espers. From his window, he could begin to contemplate the city's complex and diverse architecture, the strange looks of the towering skyscrapers and massive buildings, modern and cold, overwhelming the rest of the urban landscape with their imposing presence, like mysterious guardians or tyrants of metal and glass. Even though he was only half an hour's drive from his hometown, his friends, mate and family, they all seemed very far away now. Apart from Mitsu, his little brother, who had also been invited to join the strange city. Shigeo's face was like a mask, impassive and indifferent, but inside he was a storm brewing, a tempest of worry, stress and anxiety. He didn't know anyone here. He didn't want to leave his school and be away from his family. He had no desire to have his powers tested in any way. More than that, he wanted to flee and return home, to a world that was familiar to him, a world where he had finally found a place. His brother's face was more peaceful, and he seemed almost impatient in a way, to be able to start a new adventure. Shigeo almost felt guilty for not being able to share his feeling. But was that normal? Was he such a coward? Progress towards mob's explosion. 11%. The bus slammed on the brakes with a sinister mechanical hiss, as if to announce their arrival at the checkpoint. Once they had passed the controls and identity checks, the two psychics entered the city of science and left their normal lives behind, like a distant memory. Their ride continued its way, taking them directly to the heart of the city. Mitsu gazed in fascination at the various bizarre inventions and marvels of technology present on the streets. Shigeo, too, couldn't help but feel impressed as he watched a cohort of robots go by, cleaning the city, restlessly doing their task like metal golems. It was like a new universe, full of machines, drones, autonomous security systems, and espers. A city that looked like it had come straight out of a science fiction novel. It was hard to believe. Apparently, to the other passenger, this didn't seem at all surprising. They were mostly workers and scientists coming back from holidays, or students returning from their weekends. For them, the urban landscape was all too familiar. Suddenly, something caught the boy's attention. A bright glow illuminated one of the streets, a flash of light that was unleashed for a fraction of a second, as if a bolt of lightning had just struck. He frowned, confused. What could it be? Misaka watched the traffic on this calm, early July morning from the bridge that spanned one of the city's main avenues. Every car that passed was a story. Someone who had to work that Sunday, or foreign students returning from their weekend. For her part, she had nothing to do but hang around outside on this summer morning. The heat was already beginning to rise, stifling and piercing, the summer continuing to release its wrath. It was almost unbearable. She ran her hand through her chestnut hair, which were already drenched in sweat. I guess the heatwave warning hadn't been such a pessimistic prediction after all, she thought. After all, the weather satellite and the city's meteorological models were so advanced that they could forecast the weather to within 15 minutes, and with tiny margins of error. She didn't understand how they did it, but this was impressive, even for Academy City. She really didn't like summer. It was easier to dress for the cold, but for the heat there are limits before falling into indecency, and especially for a young girl like her, coming from a prestigious school. She was condemned to remain clean and dignified, despite her desire to sometimes let herself go and drop the prestigious school student mantle. What's more, her Tokiwada uniform was mandatory, even on Sunday and holidays. It was a strict code, even by the city standard. And although she was keen to take off her school summer sweater, she was forbidden to do so. Why did her school have the brilliant idea to give them a sweater in summer? She wasn't fanatical about following the rules, but she wanted to avoid trouble as much as possible, and not following her school instruction would mean potentially having to face her dormitory matron. And that sent an icy shiver down her spine. She was terrified of this woman. She was the third most powerful esper in the city, but the young girl feared the severity of this frigid woman more than anything. She was a monster, an opponent she wasn't keen on facing at all. The girl grew impatient. She'd already been waiting here for 10 minutes. Kuroko was sure taking her time. She was too lost in thought. She failed to notice a group of delinquents who had just surrounded her like a pack of wolves. Perhaps it was a new method of picking up young girls, but this kind of aggressive, cringe-worthy attitude left her cold. No, in fact it irritated her more than anything else. What did they expect? 5 of them running into a middle schooler? Seriously, there were people in here. Can't have a dull moment in this city, huh? Hey girl, are you alone? Asked the man leading the group. She didn't bother to reply. She didn't want to give them any attention. If you got nothing to do, why don't you come with us and have some fun? How about some karaoke? Asked another. Nope, no chance in hell she was interested. The fact those idiots couldn't read it on her sour expression was pissing her off even more. Sorry, but I'm not in the mood. She snapped expectedly. Leave me alone. Their expressions went from fake smile to a flurry of vexed, aggressive mask. Kid! Began one of them, grabbing her arm. Kid? That was the last straw. Death sentence. She could have ignored them, but she was already annoyed that her friend was late to let those simpletons spoil her day. She sighed in annoyance, and in a split second, lightning struck the city. The bus suddenly jolted, and its brakes screeched, trying desperately to slow the vehicle down. A series of horns echoed through the streets, like the bellowing of members of a panicked herd. Shigeo had to hold on tightly to his seat as the coach came to an abrupt halt. After a moment of silence, everyone seems to be in shock. What had happened? Looking through his window at the road, the young boy could only see that this was not an isolated case. All the cars had suddenly stopped, as if desperately trying to avoid hitting an invisible wall. In some cases, this has not been effective enough, and some drivers had collided, even though nothing seems to be serious. A series of horns and sirens sounded in the air, and it was clear that the street had been transformed into pure chaos. The reason for the commotion was soon made clear. The lights! All the lights at the crossroad had suddenly stopped, as if they were faulty. Shigeo quickly understood the reason for this, with what he had seen only a few seconds ago, a kind of electric shock that had just struck. But how was this possible? The sky was clear, there wasn't a single cloud on the horizon, and what's more, there hadn't been any thunder. Only clear sky and high clouds. No chance of any instability causing such weather. No, it couldn't be a natural phenomenon. You didn't have to think about it too much. This was the city of espers after all. Someone had done this. He felt it. The sensation of someone else's ability, like a psychic signature. Although this one was odd compared to the psychic he knew. Like artificial, fake, he couldn't explain. Mob felt his heart quicken at such a display of strength. It was worrying. This city wasn't so calm after all. Progress towards Mob's explosion, 16%. The smell of burning cement hung in the air. Smoke billowed from the melted tarmac, and sparks still licked the ground, which had just been the victim of an intense electrical attack. The inner bodies of the offenders had fallen like mannequins whose wire had been cut, and they had all lost consciousness under the impact of the electrical assault. Mikoto stood in the middle of the group, her expression satisfied. She didn't like solving her problem with electrical shocks, but this guy had really pissed her off. She hoped they learned the lesson at least. Of course, she didn't kill them, but they sure wouldn't be working soon. That would teach them what it costs to annoy her and call her a goddamn kid. A certain girl with tawny long hair suddenly appeared, materializing in the middle of the street, mid-air, as if by magic. She wore the same uniform as Mikoto, the brown sleeveless sweater of the Kiwadai and a light green skirt. Although she also had a pair of black straps, full of some kind of metallic spike around her thighs. Her large, wavy pigtails flowed with the breeze as she fell on the floor with the grace of a feline. She gave her friend a puzzled look, analyzing the carnage before her with a troubled gaze. She seemed to understand straight away the situation, lowering her shoulders as if disappointed. One-sama, I've told you 1,000 times not to use your powers like that. Judgment members like me should be the one dealing with those kind of troublemakers, she announced, pointing to her green armband. I couldn't help it, okay? And those guys had it coming. Besides, it wouldn't have happened if you'd been there on time, she replied, annoyed, spark still dancing around her body. The girl, named Shirai Kuroko, shrugged. You've got to stop solving your problems like that. And the reason I was late was because I was telling those delinquents for shoplifting. She pointed to the fainted group of thugs. Misaka smiled proudly. Well, you could say that I made your job easier then, right? But Shira just sighed. and started to arrest the gang of thugs, without trying to continue arguing with her senior. What a pain. Next time please don't cause such a scene. But Mikoto didn't reassure her the least. The bus eventually set off again, and after 15 minutes or so, the two brothers arrived at their destination, District 7. The all-consuming heat of early summer seized the boy as he left the cool, air-conditioned interior of the vehicle. The song of the cicadas was almost deafening, like a constant, high-pitched whistle. The two brothers took their suitcases and headed for the dormitory. Today they had a day off to settle and acclimatize to their new home. Their accommodation was a large, square concrete building. Its appearance rather ordinary and somewhat reassuring compared to the eccentricity of some of the city's landscape. The area seems quiet, and many similar buildings were lined up nearby. After all, this was a residential district for students. It didn't take long for the two brothers to find their room and start unpacking. Their new home was a flat with a kitchen, 2 bedrooms, a dining room and a living room. A modest and clean place. I suppose we are going to live here for the coming years. At least it's pretty big, commented Ritsu. Shigeo felt his heart clench at the mention of the word years. He would have preferred to finish his current year at his school, but he hadn't really had any say in the matter, and that was the most frustrating part. Apparently, he and his brother were considered natural espers for the authority of academicity, and the city lab coats were too eager to study their powers, which the boy hated. He had no idea how would the scientists react when they would discover the very nature of his powers. How would they explain his psychic gift? Did they even know the nature of Shigeo's abilities? The two brothers had agreed on one thing: to say as little as possible, not to make any wave. It was clear that in a town governed by science, ghost stories and exorcism tales wouldn't mix well. I wonder what those tests are about, asked a worried Mob as he noticed the date of 9th of July circled in red in his notebook. It was already scheduled for this week. You mean the system scan? Ritsu remained thoughtful for a moment. Honestly, I have no idea. I think it's better if you don't tell them you develop your power in the Awakening Lab. I have a feeling the scientists wouldn't like that very much. Ritsu nodded. Yeah, it's best not to attract attention. He looked at his worried brother. What about you? Are you scared of those upcoming tests? It's not really that. It's just that I don't feel like being categorized based on my powers. I find the idea absurd. You are scared about how they would react if they knew your real power, huh? Asked Ritsu, nailing the issue. Yes, Shigeo was terrified of that. He knew his powers were particularly strong. He didn't want the attention. But he was also scared of the consequences of his powers level going public. After all, this city has some kind of absurd power ranking. All the boy really wanted was a normal school life, making friends, having fun, finding a purpose. I hope they don't discover the existence of other psychics. I think they would force them to join the city, like they did with us. Progress towards Mob's explosion, 19%. Anyway, we've still got a few days before the system scan, so let's concentrate on getting to our new school tomorrow. Right, big bro? Ritsu tried to give Shigeo a reassuring smile. I just hope we can have a normal life here. The boy replied wishfully. Alright, let's do everything we can to make it happen then. We can make it. Mob nodded slowly. Yes, let's do everything we can to have a normal student life in this new city. And with that, The Kageyama brothers were mentally prepared for whatever Academy City had in store for them. Or so they thought.